Okay, digestion part two. Where do we leave off? We left off with an overview of the digestive system. Now I've got some kind of add-ons. So first let's talk about the appendix. Maybe you've heard of it. Maybe you have one. Maybe you don't. The appendix is this teeny little tube that sticks off of your large intestine. So here your small intestine connects to your large, and right where it does, you've got this little appendix sticking off. So the appendix probably, we think, is a safe house for good bacteria. So you have lots of good microbes in your digestive system. I mentioned the ones in your large intestine that help you digest broccoli. Well, the appendix is a place where they can go and they can be safe from harm, right? And so it's good. We'll talk about that in the next slide. But sometimes if your appendix becomes infected, then it can get inflamed. And then when it gets inflamed, it can expand and it can actually rupture. And if your appendix ruptures, that's bad because all the bacteria in it that are your friends, once the appendix ruptures, those good bacteria break out. They leak out into your body cavity basically, and you've got that can lead to a microbial infection of on the inside of your body, on the outside of your intestines, and that's just a bad thing. So if you ever feel pain like in the lower right half of your abdomen, it could be appendicitis and you should go to the doctor. Okay, so this is what I was talking about where your appendix harbors good bacteria. So let's start here, normal. So the green is just representing where you have helpful or beneficial bacteria or other microbes in your large intestine. Uh-oh, you ate something bad. You had some bad Chinese food. Now you've got an infection going. You got some food poisoning maybe, whatever. And so your large intestine, you can see the bad bacteria are spreading and they're causing a bunch of inflammation and pain and gas and swelling and diarrhea. This is bad. So your body flushes this out. Will try to flush out the bad bacteria by just putting a bunch of water into your large intestine and creating diarrhea. So you can see you're flushing it out. And as you flush it out, you're doing a great job moving the bad stuff out. But what about all this good bacteria? That's where this safe house comes into play. So you have these good bacteria that have been hanging out in the appendix, and so they start to leave it and they start to move back into your large intestine, and before you know it, they've spread through your whole large intestine and you're back to normal. So your appendix is good, it's helpful, you just don't want it to get infected. All right, so that kind of wraps up the major organs of the digestive system. This slide, which you can see on the PowerPoint, covers, I think we covered everything there. So you can refer to this in case what I said wasn't clear. All right, let's look at different types of digestive systems. So we looked at ours, at a human digestive system, but all animals don't have a human digestive system, obviously. So we can say that when you look at animals across the spectrum, their digestive system fits into one of two categories. They're either a complete system or an incomplete system. Incomplete systems are found in some invertebrates like this flatworm here. And so this one, so the incomplete system is gross because they take food in through their mouth and it goes through their digestive system and then their wastes go right back out where they came in. So basically they eat and poop through their mouth. Their mouth and their anus, it's the same thing. Thankfully, that's not what we have. We have a complete system. So a complete system is a tube with two openings instead of one. So the mouth and the beginning of the esophagus serve as one opening, and then the anus serves as the other opening where wastes exit. So in complete systems, we find this in larger animals and more complex animals, and it's just more specialized. So in other words, in a complete system, that's where you find stomachs and small and large intestines and livers. So you just have more organs that allow for more compartmentalization of enzymes and food as it gets digested. So a frog can eat a fly, but a flatworm can't eat a steak or a hamburger. Let's look at some digestive systems, some different types of complete digestive systems. Complete digestive systems fall into a couple of categories. For herbivores, animals that eat plants, there are two main styles of complete digestive systems: hindgut fermenters and ruminants. And I'll just give you an overview. We're going to talk about these in more detail in just a second. So a hindgut fermenter, like a donkey or a horse, they take their food in, they just chew it once. That's cool. Goes through the esophagus, goes to the stomach, goes to the small intestine. So far, so good. And then when their food hits their large intestine and their cecum, the cecum is just kind of this pouch that's connected at the beginning of their large intestine. It's kind of where our appendix is. Here and here, they've got a bunch of bacteria, and the bacteria help digest the food. So they need help digesting their food because they're eating grass. And grass, if you've ever eaten grass, and I'm sure you have, it's really hard to digest. It's got cellulose. It's a really difficult molecule for you to break down. So most of the absorption happens in the hindgut. Compare that with a ruminant. A ruminant chews its food, swallows it, sends it to the stomach. The stomach has multiple compartments. You'll see that more in just a minute. And in some of these compartments, the food ferments and bacteria take their shot digesting the cellulose. They break it down to mush. And then they puke their partially digested food back into their mouth and they chew it again. So another round of mechanical digestion. And then they swallow it. And this time it goes through the rest of the digestive system and out the back end. Okay, so I pretty much told you everything you need to know, but I have slides for each of those, so I guess I'll repeat myself. So let's look at the hindgut fermenters again. So I mentioned donkeys and horses. It's also rabbits. So again, a single stomach, small intestine, big cecum, big first section of their large intestine, and basically they chew their food once. The food goes here. Bacteria help break it down. They ferment it and get nutrients out, and then they poop it. So some hindgut fermenters, especially rabbits are notorious for this, will re-ingest fecal material. That means they eat their own poop. So why do they do that? Well, sometimes their poop still has nutrients in it. So instead of it going to waste, they'll just eat it and give it another shot, give their digestive system another shot getting nutrients out of that food. So sometimes they'll still digest their food twice, just in two different meals. Why did I have it? Okay, so here's a rabbit, same thing, stomach, small intestine, big cecum. So again, hindgut fermenter. Compare that to our digestive system, which we learned about in the last video. Small intestine, large intestine, and a really small cecum, which is where the appendix is. So this is why a rabbit can eat grass and plants really well. They've got all this help from these bacteria. This is why we can only eat certain plants. We just don't have a digestive system that allows us to eat grass or other difficult to digest plants. All right, ruminants are animals that have multiple stomach chambers. So deer, cows, sheep, etc. So again, they chew their food up, grass. They chew it up, they swallow it, and then it goes down to their stomach. And their stomach is pretty crazy. They've got 4 chambers. So the first chamber, first chamber here, this big one, is where the food goes. So here they've got a bunch of bacteria, and it ferments the food, makes it squishy. Then it goes to a second chamber where some of the moisture gets squeezed out. And this stomach is good at forcing the food back up the esophagus. So I mentioned they kind of puke their food back into their mouth. So they puke that partially digested food back into their mouth. They chew it again. This is called cud. So if you've ever seen a cow chewing its cud, that's what it's doing. And so they mechanically digest it again. This time when they swallow it, goes back down to chamber number 3. So then it absorbs some of the good stuff like water. And then from 3, it leaves through a little hole and goes to stomach chamber 4. And then eventually it makes its way to the small intestine. All right, so again, because they're eating grass, which is hard to digest, they need a way to do it. So the hindgut fermenters get most of the help from bacteria in the hindgut, whereas ruminants get help from bacteria on the front end, and they chew their food twice. With these guys, with ruminants, the help from the bacteria creates a lot of methane gas, and so cow farts. Birds have a slightly different digestive system. They have a crop and a gizzard. So the crop is like this big extendable stomach, basically. Um, and so we're like storage, like extended part of their esophagus. So if you've ever seen a bird eat, it can eat a bunch of food all at once. So maybe you've been watching your chickens. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you don't have chickens. Maybe you've been watching the birds at a bird feeder. So birds are really nervous. They're always afraid of getting eaten by cats. And so a bird will land on a bird feeder and it'll eat a bunch of seeds and then it'll fly up into the tree. All right, so what it's doing is it's eating a bunch of seeds really quickly and it fills up its crop. It gets a nice meal and then it flies up into the tree to start digesting that food. So the crop then empties and sends the food down to the gizzard. And the gizzard is where they do their mechanical digestion. So their gizzard is this muscular stomach-like organ, and it will grind and mash up the food. And birds will also eat rocks. So they'll eat little bits of little stones or pebbles, and they'll swallow them, and those pebbles go to the gizzard. And so when the gizzard is crushing up and grinding the food, those little pebbles help break up the food into smaller bits. And then the food then goes on to the small intestine. The pancreas secretes enzymes and large intestine and all that good stuff, and then out the back end. Um, in carnivorous birds like hawks and eagles, the gizzard is where when the food goes to the gizzard, let's say they ate a mouse. Well, the gizzard helps grind up that mouse, but there's a bunch of indigestible parts like hair and bone and feathers. And so the gizzard helps squeeze all the good stuff out of that, and then the bone and the feathers and the hair get sent back up to the crop, and then they puke it out. When I was a kid, there was a barn near the place that I worked, and there were some owls living in it. Owls are carnivores; they eat mice and snakes. And at the bottom of this barn silo was a bunch of owl pellets. And maybe you dissected an owl pellet back in high school. But basically, what happened would be that owl would catch a mouse, swallow it, send it to the gizzard. The gizzard basically replaces their teeth. It would remove the good stuff from the bad stuff. The good stuff goes on to the small intestine. The bad stuff, like the bones, get compacted into a little pellet, and then they would puke it up and onto the ground. So when I was a kid, I would collect owl pellets and dissect them and get little mouse skulls and snake skulls because I was a nerd. Carnivores have a different digestive system. So a carnivore digestive system is pretty simple. They're not hindgut fermenters. They don't have a gizzard. Well, most of them don't have a gizzard. They're not ruminants and chew their cud. The reason is carnivores, and I'm really talking mammal carnivores for the most part here, they're eating food that's easy to digest. So if you're a lion and you eat an antelope, you're mostly eating the meat of that antelope. And the meat is protein and it's pretty easy to digest. So a carnivore simply chews up the meat, sends it to the stomach, small intestine, large intestine, and out is poop. So pretty boring, I guess you could say, but the result is they have a pretty short digestive system relative to herbivores, and again, that's because their food is really easy to digest. Carnivores do have a stomach that can expand, so if you're a lion, you want to eat that antelope quickly before the hyenas come and steal it or before it starts to rot on the savannah. And so a lion will eat a bunch of meat as quick as it can. Its stomach will get really big, and then it'll take a couple of hours to digest all that food. And so then the lion takes a nap in the shade and digests its meal, kind of like you after Thanksgiving. Okay, that wraps up digestion. Next video, we'll talk about circulation. Later.